This is a production of Cornell University.
All right, well, thank you so much, Bill, and thanks for coming out today. I might get emotional at some point because this is going to be a lot of looking back, and there's lots of pictures and things to talk about, the people I've worked with over the years. So, of course, everybody knows that I got my start in New Jersey, right? Here we go. So again, born and raised in New Jersey. It's a wonderful place to be from. Actually, from a very, I throw this picture in there, that's from my Rutgers days when I was working, pipetting probably some really bad insecticide that we were using for a potato trial down there. But there was a time when I didn't have white hair. So I just wanted to make sure everybody sees that. And again, started there for my master's in 1981. Chris Watkins was there getting his PhD at that time. So I've known Chris longer than I've even known my wife. I'll leave it at that. Although I will say one thing I learned from Chris was that if Chris liked you, he calls you names. And based on the number of times he's called me a wanker, he and I must be best friends. Maybe Bill might be the only one who might have been called a wanker more than me, but Chris couldn't be here today. But again, and I just throw that out there. Again, there's the award-winning. We won the 1983 Spring Intramural Softball Championship at Rutgers, so I'm still very proud of that. And there's a couple of people. Gary Pavlis is in there. A lot of people know him. I'm there on the far right in the back row, and standing in front of me, or sitting in front of me, was Rich McAvoy, who was chair of at UConn for many years. So again, some of us might have been going to jail, but others did okay with that as well in that time. Then went to The Ohio State University, got my PhD out there. And again, for the graduate students here, the friends that you make in graduate school can stay with you. And for those, some of you might know a few of the people here. We've got, because some of them continue to work, or one over here, Dave Chinnery. Some people might know Dave. He's a extension educator out in Eastern New York. And this was Chuck Schmidt, who for many years worked in extension. Now I believe he's working in the hemp industry as well. And so here we are at a Halloween party back at Ohio State back in the mid-1980s. And here we are just about a month ago when I came out to give a talk to Dave's class. And the three of us always get together for that. So again, just keeping in touch with people. This person here was Michael Ruizzo. He was a year ahead of me in my PhD program, and I don't think I would have gotten my PhD without having him to bounce ideas off of and complaints to. So again, worked out well. So again, I came here in 1994. Originally was just research and extension. After I got tenure, I then added teaching to that. So oh, I love this picture with Anu. I was probably gently telling her something that she should be doing differently there. And again, the classes I've taught over the years, the 350, the principles of vegetable production, I've taught that for 20 years every other fall. And then we did an organic vegetable garden class for about 10 years, and continue to do the plant nutrition module as well. And again, that one picture there on the lower left-hand side is one of my students. Steve McKay and Rick would always line up all the equipment for all of my students on a Saturday morning. We'd go out there, all the students were able to drive these things, probably not doing what we should have been doing in terms of Cornell insurance, but Rick and Steve, I couldn't thank enough for sharing all the expertise and the equipment that they had. That was always a fun trip that we had. The research and very broad in terms of the stuff that I was working on here at Cornell. In general, some of the big things I was working with was in soil fertility, stand establishment. Did some really fun work with Phytophthora and Chris Smart, plasticulture, irrigation. And then in green is all the different crops that I've worked with. And I could probably add a few more, but these are the ones that I did quite a bit of work with over the years, including before I even got here. So again, a lot of when I was hired as the Geneva processing vegetable guy. So what that meant was I was working with the processors. At the time, there were more processors. Now we just pretty much have Seneca Foods and Notura, which is a Canadian processor, and then Farm Fresh First is the one that sort of works here in upstate New York procuring things. So looking at the best ways to keep our growers profitable here in New York as part of that. So again, what we would do is we, of course, grow everything in the field. We see how things would do. We would look at the pest resistance that they would have in the field. We look at the yields that we would have. We'd also run some fertility studies as well. And we could get all that information that you could get from the field, but what I think set our program apart was we would also process everything. Either it would be canned or it would be frozen. And you can see here in the lower right-hand corner, this was just a meeting we have every year. It's a cutting where people from the processing industry, the seed companies, can come and they can see how their product looks after it's been processed. Because sometimes you may find something that looks fantastic in the field, and then when it's frozen, the color is completely off. It just doesn't hold up. So again, we just actually had our very last cutting just last week. So again, it's part of what I was doing there. This was, and I love this example because it really talks about what we as a land-grant university can do. This came about, it was about 2001, I think, and we started noticing that our yields, you look at here, this is a variety of snap beans here, high style. And you can see this is the yield that would be expected in a certain feet of row. And then this is the yield we were getting when they were infected with a virus, CMV, cucumber mosaic virus, as well as some other viruses. Again, hadn't been something that we had noticed before, but suddenly in 2001, it hit, probably because we also had Asian soybean aphid that had just entered the country as well and was transmitting this virus around. So growers were getting, you could be having you might be expecting a 6-ton yield, you're getting half a ton yield. So again, it was a severe problem that we had. And there were a lot of questions that we just didn't know. There were no insecticides or seed treatments seemed to be able to control the aphid that, again, was moving this disease around. We knew that you could have this, but the plants could have this virus. But again, if the weather was perfect, the yields may not be so reduced. But again, if the climate wasn't perfect, then you could certainly have problems. So again, it was compounded by plant stress. There were no resistant varieties that we knew of at the time. So again, what my small part in this was really looking at the current varieties we had and doing a screening to see what might work. So what I liked about this was everybody at Cornell brought their expertise to this. So again, that's Jim Ballerstein, who is my technician there in the lower left-hand corner. So he and I did a lot of trials in the field with all of the existing beans that were out there, and we were inoculating them with the virus as well. Of course, we had longer term. Again, we're looking at just the varieties that are available. We need to bring the breeders in. So here's Phil Griffiths, that was looking at breeding more tolerant and resistant varieties. We have Mark Fuchs over here, who's again our virologist. And if you've ever brought a plant to Mark and you think there's a virus, you'll usually 99% of the time, he'll tell you there's not a virus, it's something else. But this was one when it actually happened. So again, we had him. Brian Nault out here, the entomologist, looking at the transmission and the soybean aphids and how they're moving. Because there was the possibility that things were being seed transmitted as well, we had Alan Taylor working on this with his seed biology background. And then Julie Kickert was our Cornell vegetable person on the extension team. So everybody, what I loved about it is everybody brought their expertise to it. So basically what we were able to do is we could find varieties. And there's one variety that's still being widely used today is Huntington, that we showed had this tolerance to this particular virus, while everybody else added to that. That was just one of those wonderful examples of what you can accomplish when you work with such good people and good colleagues that you have. So again, that was a fun project, I suppose you could say, but I've done a lot over the years with pumpkins. Always one of my favorite crops. I actually started doing some of this work at Rutgers in the late 1980s. Pumpkins were always an interesting crop because up until the 1980s, they were sort of the crop growers would kind of put in as an afterthought. It wasn't a big money crop. And then all of a sudden in the 1980s, we start seeing more and more interest in Halloween. People are spending more on pumpkins. People are spending more on decorations. And all of a sudden, people are paying a lot more attention to pumpkins. But we didn't really have, nobody had been really looking at the work on it in terms of the new varieties that were coming out, the wonderful breeding that was being done to give us some powdery mildew resistant varieties or tolerant varieties that were coming up. What's the best spacing? What's the best way to plant them? Transplants, direct seeding. So it was fun for me because it was all of this information, all this stuff that was just really basic information that the growers really needed. And I would go to them and hear what their questions were and then devise the research program around that. Certainly had students over the years that worked in that. And again, I'm not going to get into details here, but one of the things that my last graduate student that worked on this project found was she was comparing using plastic mulch or bare ground, direct seeding and transplants. And what she found was that the typical way that most growers are planting pumpkins, direct seeded into the bare ground, was going to give you probably the least yield that you would have, okay? That going with a transplant into bare ground or using plastic culture and even seeding into plastic was actually improving the yields quite a bit. So again, just simple little things like that really helped answer a lot of questions that we had. And of course, this is back, I think it was 1996 when that pumpkin mysteriously found itself on top of the McGraw Tower. And this was in all the media. Some of you people here can remember that. Others weren't even born at this time. And it was picked up. It was in the print media, television, about how was this pumpkin even real? And I went on record and said, I'm sure it couldn't be a real pumpkin because it would have just fallen off and would have rotted. But I remember Anu, I believe, they eventually had this huge event and they had a parade. They all went marching down to the McGraw Tower. They had a crane that came and they pulled it off. And Anu was one of the official people there to determine whether this was a real pumpkin or not. It had been a real pumpkin that was there. So yeah, so pumpkins play a big part in Cornell history here on campus as well. I was a little jealous. What?
Did you put it up there?
I did not. No one knows how it got up there. Did some work with summer squash. This was just looking at some work seeing what could actually produce a marketable squash without any pollination, without any bees. And again, so we have people that are growing these in high tunnels where, again, pollination may not happen as easily as it does in the field. But even now, with all the problems that we see with bees, we're not getting the pollination that maybe we normally would be. So again, seeing what varieties could be used was helpful. And we found some varieties of summer squash. I had a student that looked at this that found that we were getting, almost, well, here's the one was 100%, even without any pollination. We were getting seedless fruit that was happening there. So again, as you can see, I did a lot of work that was just kind of across the board with all these different things. One of my favorite colleagues was working with Chris Smart. So again, Phytophthora, a huge problem, and it only took me a couple of years. I always was calling Phytophthora fungal disease, but then I was told it was an oomycete disease. So I learned, and I've learned that now, or water mold. But again, we were actually, and it was Chris is doing, we were able to get a parcel of land at the Geneva Experiment Station that we could actually work on Phytophthora. It wasn't on any of our farms, so we had this isolated plot. We had our own equipment that we had. Chris was always able to get funding from New York State to set this up. That farm is still there. So again, here you can see Michael Mazurek. We did Michael did a lot of work with some of the peppers that he had, some of the squash that we had. This particular field, I always say was probably the most beautiful field of pumpkins I think I ever saw. We planted it out. It was an organic field. We didn't use any herbicides, but I had planted it out, and then we cultivated down the rows and between the rows. There wasn't a single weed. It was beautiful. But when you work with a plant pathologist, bad things happen because they went in and they inoculated that. Amara Dunn, who's now in IPM, I believe this was her field. And I always say she broke my heart with that because you can see all of these rotting pumpkins, but you learn to live with that when you're dealing with plant pathologists. But again, that farm is still there, and some really good work can be done there in isolation, so we don't have to worry about moving that potential disease to other parts of the farm that don't have that. Another area that I worked with, and still kind of playing in this area because this can be a real problem in a lot of organic fields, very high phosphorus levels. And again, you think, well, some organic growers should be, they're mindful of their soils, trying to keep soil health. But very often, organic growers will be adding compost or manure for the nitrogen that they need for their crops. and all of that is carrying phosphorus. And again, for most vegetable crops, you probably need about 5 to 6 times as much nitrogen as you do phosphorus. So the phosphorus levels start to build and start to build. So again, working with growers to see what else we can do to stop just adding some of the additional compost and manures, which are great, but again, are causing some problems. So we've been doing some work with that. And then, yeah, this was work that, again, with Thomas Bjorkman. So we were looking at starter P. This is the phosphorus that you're going to put down typically when the soils are cool. Even if the soil is cool, even though phosphorus levels may be high, early on, the crop could still show a deficiency and an issue with that. So again, we were looking at what we could do to try to reduce that. And I don't know exactly sure where he came up with this idea, but he was looking at the use of potassium bicarbonate, essentially, and sodium bicarbonate as well, baking soda, as a way to possibly solubilize the phosphorus that's in there in a chemical reaction. And in certain soils, this actually worked really well. It did not cause any the sodium bicarbonate did cause some phytotoxicity, but the potassium bicarbonate didn't. So again, I thought it was really fascinating work. And again, working with colleagues like Thomas and others, you can really get into some fantastic and different ideas. So again, we're looking at that. I did a lot of work, and I was really excited when I first came here because we were just getting into the ability for growers to get an instant analysis of their soil in terms of nitrogen. Okay, so again, this is an in-season test that somebody could do with a meter like this. You mix the soil with an extracting solution, you put a drop of that onto the meter, and it tells you what your level of nitrate is in the soil. And basically what we found is if your soil nitrate level was above about 25 parts per million, you were fine. You didn't need to add any additional nitrogen. So I was really excited about this because the price of these meters would come down. It could be done. We did testing, worked with others. Don Halseth was doing a lot of interesting work with potatoes on this. And I thought this was really an exciting way to go. But what I found was that I could tell growers that they wouldn't have to put out this additional nitrogen. And they could save maybe $50 or $100 per acre for that. We're talking about a vegetable crop, it could be worth $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 per acre. Growers are not really interested in saving a little bit of money like that. But what I did learn, and stupidly, it took me a long time to figure this out, if you can show an issue where the higher fertility levels that might not be needed might be causing some quality issues. So here, for example, if you have a lot of nitrogen on onions, you can get some very big bulbs, but then those bulbs, they never really close up at the end of the season, so diseases can get down into the green area and cause all kinds of bacterial blights in there. We've seen problems with, in cabbage, usually a low potassium, high phosphorus, can give us some color problems, and then in tomatoes as well, there can be some issues with that too. So again, when you can show growers that it has an impact, beyond just you're saving a few bucks, then you can get their attention. And then you can start really making some inroads into that as well. Just took a long time to figure all that out. Again, I've always had a large extension appointment, both when I was at Rutgers and when I came here. So some of the things I've worked on, I've listed, and I'll run through a few of these as well. My famous pumpkin production guide, I had to put that in there for Kevin Maloney, technician up in Geneva. He always talks about that. So I promised him he's going to get the last one. I've got a signed copy for him as well, because that'll be worth something someday. So again, one of the things I worked on very early with Kurt Pretzel and Mike Hoffman, Kurt in IPM and Mike in entomology, was updating the old vegetable, they used to be called the recommendations, and then for legal reasons, they're now called the guidelines. And with the original recommendations, it was basically just a list of chemicals that were there. And we wanted to get a lot of the other information, all the cultural information that could be in there, and put that right in there with the chemicals so that people could see all of that. So you can see here, so this is just looking at a particular disease, anthracnose, in beans, and it gives you a little bit of background, what to look for, how to identify the disease, scouting thresholds, are there any resistant varieties, all the cultural things that you can do. So all of that is there before you get to the actual chemicals, and the chemicals again, here it's, this is from 2014. I think most of those chemicals would be only for conventional users, but again, you can also put things that are more the biologicals. You can put some of the organic materials in there as well. And again, sort of giving them equal billing to the chemicals that are there too. And then you can also have other information like post-harvest and harvesting information, and can all be in one site. So we got this done. Really proud of this. One of the things I remember using for justifying getting tenure while I was here years ago, and it was good, but it takes a lot of updating. And right now, a lot of things have been added to it over the years, and it just needs, we're thinking about what we can do differently with it. And that'll be beyond my job, but again, it was, I think, really an exciting thing when we first put this out. So I'm going to talk about things that were really good at one point, and then for one reason or another, they've sort of fallen to the wayside, like the Cornell guidelines. The New York State Vegetable Conference, I was in charge of that for a few years, and then in 2004, we finally got the fruit people, the berry people, the vegetable growers, all to come together in one meeting, and we did this. It was our Producers Expo, but for every year, there was always something that we didn't have a central location, we didn't have this, we didn't have that. And then finally, in 2020, everything came together. We had fantastic attendance. We had everybody meeting in central Syracuse in the city at the On Center. We had a trade show of 150. We had 3 days of sessions, hotel right there. And I patted myself on the back. I said, I finally did it. I finally got everybody together in one location. And again, even before I came here, I used to do the same thing in New Jersey with their conference as well. And then I guess I was a little bit premature, because what happens then is we did this in January of 2020, and I kept reading stories about COVID. It was very bad in China at that point, and within weeks it was here. We tried to do this. We were going to do the expo again the following year in 21, but again, things got shut down. We tried doing it by Zoom and in 21 and 22, and now it's just kind of fallen apart. But if we stopped, if I had retired in 2020, I'd have a really good story to tell with this. But now I think it's just going to be a matter of people are going to work their own way, and then eventually it's probably going to come back together. Casey. But we've got to get somebody with the extension appointment to do that. A lot of fun. I've worked a lot with the master gardeners in the state. I love speaking to master gardeners, because the master gardeners are there. They're not there. They haven't come to listen to you for pesticide credits. They're really there because they're interested in what you're saying. So it's always nice. And then Chris Smart and I did a lot with K through 12, but mostly it was, I was going to say undergraduate, but grammar school kids that we were working with on that. So this one picture up there, that was a local school just down the street from the experiment station, where we had a garden that every third grade class got a section of that garden, and we're planting things in there and getting their hands dirty. And then we used that for a science summer camp as well, for the kids going from 3rd to 4th grade, and they were responsible for things and taking measurements and doing all those things. So that was a lot of fun that we had. Again, COVID kind of stopped that. We haven't really been going back to it, but that's something, certainly that's an area I'd like to get back into in retirement. There's certainly a need, the food deserts that we have, the lack of food, fresh food for people. So again, being able to grow things locally like that would be good and helpful, but that's always been a lot of fun. So again, looking at some of the changes that have occurred over the years, and I think one of the big ones is the people that used to be, this is lists, the list here in yellow are the people that were working in vegetable crops in the department. It was either in Ithaca or Geneva. So this isn't plant pathology, this isn't entomology, this isn't even plant breeding, because although I have some breeders there, those are the ones that were in the horticulture department, as compared to people like at the time, Molly John. Some of you might remember Molly. She was over, Michael Mazurek took over for her. And of course, they're in plant breeding, and that's his primary department. So again, we had all those people, plus I'll put a couple of others that will be retiring soon. Alan Taylor, of course, hasn't announced anything, but I'd say within the next few years, Alan will likely be gone. So if you look at this is 19 people that have left us over the years. So left us sounds like some have unfortunately passed away. And so when you look at that, okay, well, what have we got since then? So we've hired 5, and 2 of which have just come about in the last year with both Casey and Collins. Griff was, I think, 99. Anu was 96. And then Lynn was just in 2000. She actually brought COVID when she came. I blame her for that. So we've lost a lot of people. So the question always is who's going to do the applied work, and some of it falls on the people that are here. But again, what happens is if I take over a crop that somebody had, or I take over the teaching, it's sort of I get very broad, which is fine, but I don't really, as I always say, I'm 2 miles wide but 1 inch deep in terms of everything that I do. The other thing that people, I mean, if you look at the people that were hired, well, Anu is not working 100% on fresh market vegetable production. She heads the small farms program, which probably takes a little bit of your time. Lynn, as compared to Robin, who for the most part was just working on vegetables and then a little bit of fruit at the end, Lynn is doing all the horticultural crops for weed control. So again, there's a lot that's put on the plate. So where this has gone is the regional programs that have been set up. So we've got the regional extension people out there. And this has been an area that I've spent a lot of time in extension. When I first was hired 30 years ago, there was only a few people, I think was counting it up. I think there were like 4 or 5 people that were on regional teams. There was one in Western New York, there was one in the Finger Lakes, and there was one in the Capital District. So the idea behind a regional team as compared to a county-focused team, because again, every county in New York has a cooperative extension office. And for the most part, the person that's hired by the county is a generalist, okay? So they might be hired to work on crops. They might be hired to work on animals. They might be doing 4-H, okay? And there's a combination of all of that. So again, they're county employed. It's the county that's going to determine if these people are doing a good job for reappointment. They're not doing much research at all. It's more a traditional extension that's happening. A bachelor's is a minimum for them. The salary is usually lower than what we see for the regional people. So again, we still have the county focus here, and we still have a lot of county educators, but what we've seen a huge increase in the last 20-some years is these regional teams that have more of a statewide focus as well. So again, they're covering multiple counties. They are Cornell employed. So again, they're not county-based. They're specialists. Okay? It could be on a crop. It could be on a particular area, post-harvest, food safety, something like that. Definitely contain a research component. Again, doing research, field research that again was being done by on-campus faculty for many years. Higher salary than what they would get if they were in the county, but again, not the same salary they would get if they were on-campus faculty. Master's a minimum. Many of them already have PhDs as well that they've got. And again, when they go up for a reappointment in 3 years, they go through a Cornell reappointment. So again, it happens through the campus with input from the county and the stakeholders that they serve. So again, the funding, I think originally it was supposed to be, I remember it was 72% of the funding was supposed to come from the county. Extension was going to be about 20%, and then the individuals on the teams were supposed to come up with the rest, which was about 8 or 10%. The reality is that much more like this. The amount coming from the counties is much less, up to maybe 40%. Cornell has maintained their funding levels there. But again, a lot of the money, and in some cases, the majority of the money, or the plurality of the money, is coming from grants. It's coming from program-generated funds, from meetings and things like that. And just the 2 teams that I'm most familiar with, they're bringing in about $250,000 each to try to run those programs. But again, and this is where I think Helene Dillard and Chris Watkins really need to take a lot of credit for really building these teams, because now I believe there's 12 teams and over 70 specialists that we've got out there, and they are doing fantastic work. But again, with that, you know, are we putting too much on that? Are we asking them to do too much? And I think in some cases we are, because they've come to us and say, you know, this should be faculty's job to do this. We can't handle all of that. We don't have the time to do all of that. If you're out in a regional area, not on campus, will you have a lab? Will you have access to equipment that you might need to do the research? You may not have that. So again, we're at that point now where we have fantastic people. I've got nothing but praise to say about the regional people that we have. But again, you know, we're asking an awful lot of them as well to do everything that so many faculty used to do. And again, just a shout out here to this picture in this corner up here. Mark Giles was a person that worked diligently in extension administration to get these teams working. And he's been gone now for about 10 years, unfortunately, but somebody that I don't think we'd have the teams. He ran with the idea that Helene and Chris had, and really went with that. So again, a shout out to him as well. So again, finding those qualified people, it's interesting. One little change that we've seen. When I was at Rutgers, I remember working very closely with the organic community. This is in the late 1980s, and I wasn't always looked at by some of my colleagues as this is what we should be doing. As one person told me, we don't work with them. But I did. I figured it was better to bring everybody into the fold, and I always enjoyed doing that. And what I found is that when we were trying to fill say a regional specialist position 20 years ago, we'd always ask if they were open to organic farming, okay? Just to make sure that they were okay with that. We've gone complete reverse now. Now we have to ask the people, are you okay with conventional farmers? Can you give recommendations to conventional farmers? And we've kind of gone full circle on that. And some people aren't comfortable with that at all. And the reality is 85, 90% of the growers in the state are not organic. So we need to be able to talk to them as well. But again, it's just fascinating to see that change. And again, some of you might know the name Elliot Coleman. He's a grower in Maine, an organic grower, big organic grower, has been around for a number of years. And I remember we brought him into a meeting at Rutgers, and he was talking about how, you know, farmers, you know, he says, 85% of everything I do as an organic farmer is the same as what a conventional farmer does, but people and even farmers themselves always want to sort of create this tension between the groups instead of everybody just sort of working together. And it's nice to see that people have sort of come together a lot compared to where we were 30 and 40 years ago. So again, the regional approach, again, there are still county expectations. And I was just at a meeting with the county executive directors with one of the teams, and they were like, you know, we just don't seem like we have that connection to campus anymore. But again, the connection is with these people. And again, the regional specialists have to do a really good job to inform all the individual county directors, you know, what they're doing in that county. If they're meeting with their grower, if they've got a project on one of their farms, just to keep them all informed, because the county executive directors have to go to the county and ask for funding. Okay, you know, that 30 or 40% is still coming from the county. So we still have to have that link there, which is very important. And again, I think the teams do a pretty good job of promotion in terms of what they've been doing. But, you know, it can always change, I suppose. But again, that's just an issue. So again, that was, wow, that was just my whole background there, in case somebody wants to offer me a job here. But again, just talking about some of the issues that we have here, and some of this is definitely for New York, the cost of doing business in New York. If you're a vegetable farmer, taxes, energy, wages, okay? We're paying, what, over $15 an hour for minimum wage. You could be, overtime starts at 40 hours, I think. So again, just go south to Pennsylvania and see the differences in terms of the restrictions that they might have just there, let alone going to other countries. So again, the cost, the labor availability, that is going to be a huge issue. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. We're seeing that all the time of the people that may not be working our farms. You know, where's that farm labor going to come from? Vegetables takes a lot of hand labor. And yeah, we're starting to see more of robotics come in, but again, it's still a long ways off. And especially for small diversified farmers that we have. The regulatory environment in New York. Again, if you're a grower in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, Ohio, you can probably use chemicals that we can't use here. They haven't been allowed by our New York State DEC. The age of farmers, I don't think this is a problem. 57 seems very young to me. But you know, where's that next generation of farmers going to come from, especially when the price of land is so high? So again, and it's unfortunate because I've never seen such a group of, or a generation of people so interested in going back and farming than what we've had. I see it in my classes. I'm sure you see that as well. Throw on top of this climate change, extreme weather events, new invasive pests that are always seem to be coming in. Limited grower funding here in New York for vegetables. An industry that's worth $400, $500 million a year. And in terms of what we're getting from farmers directly, it's probably 200,000. Okay, so again, if we could just get a fraction of what that's worth, we should have $1 to $2 million. But I have cabbage up there. We got a cabbage marketing order 20 years ago, and they could charge $4 an hour to each, $4 an acre for each grower that's growing it. Well, yeah, so that raises about $20,000 a year. That's not going to go very far, especially on a crop where it probably costs about $6,000 to $8,000 per acre to grow the crop, and we're asking for $4,000. Okay, limited prices haven't really been keeping up with inflation. Our yields here in New York and throughout a lot of the Northeast, again, have been pretty flat. Again, as we're dealing with a lot of the climate change and issues that we see here. And then this is just, I throw this out here in terms of the markets. So this is starting back in 1990. This is for fruit and vegetables, but again, it's very similar for vegetables as well, or just vegetables. And again, the blue line is the amount of US imports. And you can just see how this is going up. And this over here is the gap between the imports and the exports that we've got. So again, more and more produce that's coming into the US, you know, really since the middle of the 1990s, as some regulations have changed at that point. That has a big impact. That has a big impact on the growers. That they're making decisions in terms of what crops that they want to have. Mexico and Canada, for the US, those are the two biggest in terms of vegetable imports. The others, Peru, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and then China, way down at the bottom. We don't get a lot of fresh vegetables from there. Garlic is probably the biggest thing we're getting from China. That. And then again, I'm just sort of throwing this out here because we're seeing this all the time. We don't have an average year anymore. We're constantly having, it's either too dry, it's too wet. It's usually both in the same season at different times of the year. This was just some work that Dave Wolf had done back in 2017, which again was asking what's causing the problem for your crops. And then, you know, sort of leaving it on this unhappy note, but it's true. You know, the recommendations that I was making to growers 30 years ago are different than what I'm making to growers today. When I first came, very few, probably half the vegetable growers, maybe less, had irrigation. If you want to stay productive on the ground, you need irrigation every year. So again, the trends we're seeing, yeah, organic production keeps going up. Interest in local production. We've seen that when the supply chain, you know, is under a lot of pressure in COVID, that it was nice to have some of our local farmers there, but there's an interest in local production, but again, whether that's going to be able to maintain our industry, I don't know. Certainly ag and controlled environment ag, urban agriculture, to sort of kind of different in some ways, but certainly growing. Extended season, high tunnels. New York, I think, is the leading grower of using high tunnels that we've got. New crops, and then I've got digital and ag robotics, and we've got some fantastic work that's being done. I'm so excited about some of the colleagues I have that are doing that work. And again, it's beyond me, but it'll be fascinating to see what this looks like in 5 or 10 years, especially as some of the costs do come down. So again, with that, I just wanted, I've got to end this with some thanks. And starting at Rutgers, this was my, when I was an undergraduate, he was a professor he taught me when he was my master's advisor. He was also my colleague when I went back and was serving at Rutgers. This is Steve Garrison, who was a statewide vegetable specialist as well. And when I think of the times I was in his office as a master's student, asking him questions and asking him this and that, which I didn't think anything of until I had students and realized how needy I was. And again, I couldn't have had a nicer man than Steve there. Mel Henninger was my first department chair down there, also was on that winning softball team, and Pete Nietzsche was my technician and now colleague. He's an extension educator down at Rutgers as well. And then, you know, I came to Cornell in '94. I was lucky enough to get Hugh Price as my chair. And he was my chair for 8 years, and I couldn't have asked for a better chair than him. And I replaced Bob Becker, who very few people here would remember, but a few will. And Bob was just the most wonderful extension educator, professor, and more so helpful to me when I was getting started. Kurt Petzold in IPM, he and I worked together on a lot of different things. Marvin Pritz. When I took over as chair of horticulture, Marvin Pritz was 2 offices down. And I can't tell you, certainly the first year, how many times I would ask, Marvin, what do I do? And he always rationally explain something to me and give me my options. And again, it was certainly something that I really appreciated very much. Chris Watkins, I think we've already said enough about him. And again, the administrative staff that I was able to work with over the years, both in Ithaca and Geneva, and continue to work with, have just made my job, certainly when I was chair, so much better and so much easier. And I have Craig Kramer in here as well, because Craig is this wonderful person that I'm sure we've all worked with. And when you're asking Craig to do you a favor because you kind of waited too long to do it, Craig is the type of person that makes you feel like you're doing him a favor by letting him help you. And Craig, I just wanted to thank you for everything that you've done for us over the years. And then just, again, some of the people, Jim Ballerstein was my longtime technician that I worked with for many years. But again, there were other technicians that I was able to work with, some from Ithaca, some from Geneva. There's Betsy Leonard and Joe Shale, one of my favorites. And again, my summer crew that we had over the years. Here's a young Michael Rosado sitting right here, who became my technician later. And again, the last 2 graduate students I had, which again, if you're lucky enough to have students like this, they become almost like second children to you in some ways. And Michael then came and took over as my technician since 2020. And it has been the best, most fun 5 years. I got to step down as chair, and I got to work with Michael. So it's always been a lot of fun working with him. And then, of course, I've got to thank so many other people here, so many of the other faculty that I worked with over the years. And I kept adding pictures to this, and I kept thinking, oh, I'm going to forget somebody. And some of the folks here, you know, as far away as Long Island, there's Joe Sheska. I even have a fruit person on there, okay? I have Susan Brown on you, just to show you that I can work with tree fruit people as well. And then finally, a big shout out to my family. My wife, Beth, again, don't know as long as Chris Watkins, but close to it. My 2 kids, here they are. I'm sure they were 21 when they were drinking there. But now, and then they have their wonderful spouses that it's just been great. So again, we've been very lucky. And then finishing up, and anybody that's talked to me over the past 4 years knows that I love my grandchildren. And I've got my Adelaide there, and you know, she's holding her little brother. She's 4 years old, and she's holding her little brother, who's about almost 2 months old at this point. And I was able to go to Adelaide's nursery school here and talk about pumpkins. So combining my 2 favorite things there. So with that, I'm done. And happy to answer any questions. Deal.
I'll just pick up with the guided question. How many times would you estimate in your career you've driven from Geneva to?
We're doing the math this morning, and I think driving from Geneva to Ithaca, probably 1,700 to 1,800 times. Again, since 1994. So I know that way. There have been times I've gotten to Ithaca or Geneva and think, I don't remember anything about the trip, but I'm here safe. So
you could ask if Geneva has any questions.
I could, I'm just afraid to. I was checking chat. I don't see anything there.
Hey, I do have a
Anything from
question.
Geneva?
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Hi, Steve. Wonderful seminar, fantastic career. I'm not going to embarrass you like you did to me, but I did want to say you have had a huge impact in your career in extension research and also in the community. I don't know if you know, but there were at one point 103 participants on Zoom. So if I subtract out Beth and Matt, sorry guys, but that gives you 101. So I give you 101% on the seminar, 200% on your career, and signing off. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Bruce. Anything else? Anybody have a pumpkin question, tomato question?
Solved all the problems.
How many seeds are in the pumpkin?
Usually about 550. That's always a good guess. Yeah.
Advice would you have for people who were starting a career in extension?
You know, you could not find a shyer, more introverted person than me. And some people think, oh, I could never work in extension with that. But that's not, you can be very effective as an extension. Just listen, just talk to people and listen. They'll tell you what their problems are. And then just work with them on that. And there's nothing better than making a difference when somebody's got a problem like that. It's just so rewarding. So yeah, and I urge the younger people here to think about that career in extension. It's wonderful.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.